Good afternoon. Going to go ahead and call to order our workshop. I'd like to declare a quorum of 6 trustees present. Take us to item C, public comments. Ms. Horn, having no public comments, we'll go to our workshop session. Item D1, receive report on preliminary 2021 STAR results. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Mr. Nugent. Here with a look at our preliminary 2021 STAR and EOC results is our Chief Administrative Officer, Ms. Molly Perry. Ms. Perry?
Good evening. Mr. Webber will get that pulled up for us, so we'll have a visual to go along with this evening's results. We annually report our preliminary STAR results to the Board of Trustees, and I say preliminary because these are initial scores, and ultimately there will be some adjustments in what are used for those state accountability purposes, because we do have some exclusions that happen for those students who were not with us here in College Station ISD on Snapshot or the last Friday in October. So this evening, what you'll see are just those overall results compared to the state across all of the different content areas and subjects and grade levels to get a better idea. Now, as you all, I'm sure, recall, we have not looked at this for a little while because we did not have STAR administration in 2020. And there certainly has been a lot of interest in student performance across the state and nation, and even here in our local district regarding that change from 2019 to 2021 and the potential impact of COVID-19 on student learning. So we'll speak to that this evening a little more than we would have historically in looking at student performance over time. So just a very brief recap of some of the highlights related to 2021 this year. To remind you all, we were required by the state to test our students on site, meaning if a student was receiving virtual instruction at the time of the state assessments, they were either required to come on site or we were not able to administer STAR assessments for those students. We really saw very minimal changes to that testing system. Sometimes we'll see lots of updates. Maybe we'll see a vendor change, which we will be in the next year, or other significant adjustments to things like accommodations or test procedures, or even moving towards online assessments, which we'll also see in the next few years, but very little change for us compared to 2019. And just as a reminder, because we did not have assessments in 2020, all of our elementary school students who took STAR, 3rd and 4th grade, were first-time testers this year. So that was definitely a unique circumstance compared to years past. We saw continued reporting for our parents in that digital format at texasassessment.gov, and that information is available on demand online. You can look at results from districts and at the state level all over, but to get that student level information, you have to have a login, and we provided information to our families via email back on June 15th on how to do that. If they're not able to retrieve that code to log in, they certainly are welcome to contact their campus, and we'd be happy to help them with either that or provide a paper copy. So, quick reminder. In STAR, we have 3 different levels that are considered to be passing. The first is approaches grade level. So those students, even though it's a little confusing in terms of the terminology, have passed STAR. So we have approaches, then we have meets, which is a higher level of passing, and then the highest level would be masters. Those students who do not meet grade level are those who have not passed the assessment. So let's talk a little more about our performance here in College Station ISD. We'll begin with reading, and before I change the slide, I just want to give you a little warning. We're going to acclimate because there's going to be a lot of colors and pictures as we start to go through this. So we're going to start off simple. Reading performance in grades 3 through 8. So right now we're looking at the approaches, or just that passing standard across the board. So we've got blue representing the state, and red representing College Station ISD. So these are the percent of students who were at that approaches level. So right away, you can visually see all of the grade levels in the area of reading exceeded those state rates at the approaches level, with probably the most significant difference being in our third grade students. So we're going to drill into these a little more by grade level and look at those other passing standards. So we'll start on the left, and I'm going to really walk you through before we move through the slides at perhaps a little quicker pace. So again, blue is going to represent the state, and red continues to represent CSISD. So we've got 2019 performance in the lighter shade of blue or red, and 2021 performance in the darker shade. So you can see right away, if you look at those darker shades, the 2021 performance of the state relative to College Station ISD, and how, for example, in third grade reading at the approaches level, the state was at 68%, where College Station was at 81%. But you can also see how the state rate changed from 2019 to 2021, so 76 down to 68, versus College Station ISD, where we were at 80% and actually showed some gain up to 81% at that approaches level. Same thing for the meets, or that higher passing standard, and masters. Now, you won't find those numbers adding up to 100%, because if a student is in that master's level, the highest level of passing, they're also going to be considered meets and approaches, because they've hit all three levels of passing. So looking at fourth grade reading, we saw a similar dip with the state. The district did show some declines in fourth grade reading from 2019 to 2021, although not as significant as that state rate. Any questions about the layout of the slides before we continue? Because we're going to be looking at these across the grade levels. All right. So next we'll look at intermediate reading. Again, we're going to see a very consistent trend at that state level, where performance declines were observed between 2019 and 2021 across the various grade levels and contents. Here in CSISD, we held pretty steady at the approaches level in reading, but we actually saw some good gains at that master's, or the highest passing level for fifth grade reading. We saw again some dips, but not as significant, and we continue to surpass those state rates really across the board at the various levels of passing standard in reading and fifth and sixth grade. Then seventh and eighth grade, we saw again some gains in both seventh and eighth grade, looking at that approaches standard, whereas we saw declines at the state level. We'll shift our focus to math in grades 3 through 8 now. Again, looking first at that district-wide 2021 approaches standard format. Again, we saw the same trend in terms of all student groups level relative to the state performance exceeding, especially in the area of third grade and eighth grade. One thing I do want to point out is that here in College Station ISD, we have a very large number of students who accelerate in mathematics, some beginning in the intermediate level, but many beginning in the middle level. So specifically in seventh grade, because of that advanced math participation, 48% of our seventh grade students actually participated in the seventh grade test. And so it's a relative difference when you look at that state performance, because we have such a large number of students who are participating in, say, an algebra EOC, or even an eighth grade exam because of the mathematics course in which they're enrolled. And then conversely, in eighth grade, we actually have quite a few students that have already taken the eighth grade test in earlier grades and have taken the Algebra 1 EOC, but under state statute are required to take that eighth grade exam again, even though they have surpassed those levels. So we have high participation rates in eighth grade and low in seventh. So shifting to elementary. in grades 3 and 4. Statewide, you may have heard the media definitely reported a lot of information about mathematics in particular, because these were where the more significant declines in statewide performance were observed. We noted declines here in College Station ISD relative to 2019 as well. However, they were not as significant, and despite those declines, our student performance remained higher than the state, and in many instances, quite a bit higher. Then in grades 5 and 6, it's worth noting that we only had one administration of both math and reading assessments in grades 5 and 8. Previously, students were afforded 3 opportunities to pass those assessments as part of the Student Success Initiative, or SSI. That's actually been eliminated moving forward as a result of the 87th legislative session. But when you look at those rates for grade 5 math, previously, students had multiple opportunities, whereas this year they did not. So again, we see relatively stable performance in 5th grade here in College Station ISD, a bit of a dip in 6th grade, but relative to the state, we remained strong in our performance. And then in middle school, again, we've got some information noted there about the number of students, or percentage of students that were participating in that assessment being much lower than in other grade levels due to the advanced mathematics participation. And finally, 8th grade, you can see, again, we had a little bit of a dip relative to 2019, but definitely the state saw significant loss. So then we'll transition to writing. This assessment is given in only 2 grade levels, 4th and 7th. So you can see our approaches level performance in 2021 relative to the state. And then the breakdown of those 2 particular grade levels is probably worth noting that the writing assessment will be combined with reading in the future. So you won't see a separate writing score as we move forward and see those assessments redesigned. We did see some good gains there relative to a decline in 7th grade writing at the state level. And science, we administer in grades 5 and 8. So you can see there, blue is state, College Station in red. And then we saw at the local level that the assessment percentage of approaches maintained pretty close to the 2019 rate, while the state saw some significant declines. And finally, for grades 3 through 8, we have social studies in grade 8. Happy to report that we maintained our rate of students approaching while the state saw an 11-point decline. And we actually saw increases at the meets and masters level. So then we'll shift our focus to those end of course exams that are administered in 5 content areas after a student has completed the content for enrolled high school courses. These exams are required for graduation, with the exception of those students who didn't have an opportunity to take them last year due to school closures and the assessments not being administered. So same trend as we look at the all students level, with performance excelling relative to state in all of the content areas. Then looking at Algebra 1, we did see some dips in performance, but again, not nearly as significant as the state experienced overall. Biology, some similar trends, a slight gain at the master's level for us. English 1 and 2, we've got side by side here. Actually saw very minimal loss in the percentage at approaches for English 1. English 2, interestingly, we saw a slight increase, and I thought that was particularly telling because those students actually didn't take an English 1 exam last year, and English 2 is typically a more challenging test. So we were glad to see those results across the performance standards for our English 2 students. And U.S. history, can see a similar trend in terms of state decline, with a slight decline here in CSISD, but overall strong performance relative to the state. And to provide just a highlight of the data that we just looked at, overall, our students met those passing standards at higher rates than the state in every subject and every grade and every EOC exam assessed. We did see those statewide declines in performance, especially in the area of math. But here in College Station ISD, where we did see declines, they were certainly less significant in those grades and subjects, despite all of the challenges associated with COVID-19, the closure of school for face-to-face instruction for a portion of the prior school year, as well as adjustments in the instructional setting and teachers juggling everything that needed to happen last year. We did see some gains, especially in certain grade levels of reading and writing and English too. So we're certainly very, very glad to see that. And then we are in the process currently of really drilling in and disaggregating student performance data at the student group level. And that will help us to better be prepared to implement goal 2 of our strategic plan, which is related to elevating the performance of historically underperforming student groups. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I noticed on as a result of the relatively small number of Spanish testers, they were not included in the aggregate amounts or
Yes.
numbers. Is that CSISD a small number or statewide or?
Yes, certainly here in College Station ISD, we have a smaller percentage of our students that are being assessed in Spanish. Those results are not included in these preliminary reports. However, they will absolutely be included in our accountability reports and the final results that will be presented and as part of our taper.
I have to comment. I think it was, it really, there are a lot of positives to come out of that. I mean, I think it really demonstrates that our district has had a really good year last year. And so kudos to everybody who helped, make that happen. And just follow up with again, we always say, and I say too, STAR's not everything, but it does allow us to have a little snapshot like this and look at, in aggregate, how our district is compared to, the rest of the students in the state. And obviously, they've compared favorably. So I thanks to everyone.
I always say STAR results are a byproduct of good instruction. They're not the focus of why we provide good instruction. So thank you for that.
And I would just comment that, and in areas we actually saw growth. I think it just is a testament to the work that our teachers did through the course of the numerous opportunities we encountered last year. So while we never want to see our student performance go down, respective to the challenges that were put before our folks through the course of last year, I don't know if I hope I never say this again, but I am proud of the work they did. There's always room for improvement. However, when you compare what other kids throughout the state did relative to ours, our folks did an absolutely wonderful job.
Anyone else? Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Ms. Perry. All right, we're going to move to D2, receive report on House Bill 3 board goals. Mr. Martindale.
All right, thank you, Mr. Nugent. Under House Bill 3, as you recall, probably last August, school boards were required to adopt performance goals for 5 years in early childhood literacy and math, as well as CCMR, or College, Career, and Military Readiness. Here, with a required annual update on our student performance relative to those adopted House Bill 3 board goals, is our Chief Academic Officer, Dr. Penny Trammell. Dr. Trammell?
Okay. Good evening. As we get started, well, let's get a visual here. As we get started, I just wanted to remind the board of why we have these goals. These goals were put in place by House Bill 3 to help the state accomplish their 60 by 30 goal, which involves students pre-K through 12th grade scoring at least at a 60% proficiency rate, a meets standard rate on as they exit our system. So they have 2 checkpoints for that. One checkpoint is at 3rd grade. And at 3rd grade, they want 60% of all students meeting the state's meets standard at 3rd grade reading. And then at 12th grade, they want 60% of all of our high school seniors graduating without the need for remediation and achieving an industry-accepted certificate aligned with a living wage job, or enrolling in a post-secondary education program, or enrolling in the military. So those are their 2 checkpoints to help them achieve that 60 by 30 goal, and that would be 60% by 2030. So we have a few years left to get there. So the requirements for this initiative was to establish local goals and then to annually report progress on those goals. As we look at our first goal, overall in reading, this is at the 3rd grade level. Our goal was that the percent of 3rd grade students that score at the meets grade level standard on STAR reading will increase from 51% in 2019, because reminder, we didn't have STAR in 2020, to 56% by June 2024. These benchmarks were started from our 2019 STAR data. And as you can see, we exceeded that goal. Our goal for 2021 was to achieve overall in 3rd grade at a 51.5%. Our 3rd graders achieved a 50% meets rate or percentage on STAR this year. And as you look across at our different groups of students, you will notice that they performed very close to or exceeded the target with the exception of 1 or 2 areas. So we felt like this was great progress considering these students missed spring. On-site instruction in the 2019 or 2020 school year rather, and some of them were virtual as we started this year, quite a few of them. So
Penny, the blue is the goal that we established last
the
summer,
blue is
July,
the goal
August.
that we
and
established.
And the green is the actual performance
Correct.
From the school.
So,
the overall percentage.
Right.
Correct?
So the top line is the overall performance target that was established, and then the second line is the actual student performance for this year in STAR. As we look at our Circle progress monitoring tool that we use in Head Start Pre-K, we focused on our phonological skills, given that the state is focusing on reading, and we know that students are more apt to graduate if they can read by 3rd grade. In looking at reading, we did notice a dip in our pre-K population. I think it's important to note each class comes in. We don't have any longitudinal data on them. They come in either from a private preschool or straight from the home, not having experienced any kind of preschool experience in their younger years, and so we test them, and this group of students, although we didn't meet the target of 72.5 for this year, they did make a 20-point gain in their literacy skills from the initial testing of 44% when they came in. So while it doesn't look like they made great progress, they really did make great progress in being ready for kindergarten compared to when they came in the fall. And we did test all students. The virtual parents brought their children up for testing, all 3 test administrations. As we move on to kindergarten, we know we measure this group with MAP, and looking at our goal of 58.5%, meeting the target this year at kindergarten, you'll see that we scored at the 53rd percentile, or 53% of our kids met that target. As we look at our student groups, you'll notice that our groups exceeded or were just a little bit shy of the yearly goal set. So I think, that just states our kindergarten teachers did a great job, considering, some of these kids didn't finish their pre-K year. Many of the private and daycares were closed, and, obviously we were closed in the spring. Then as we move on to our cumulative first through third grade students, this is our last progress monitoring measure on this goal. Our goal, or our target, was 44.5% this year. And as you can see, our students scored meets at the 53% marker. As we look at our student groups, we would see that they exceeded in all categories. So these teachers and students worked really, really hard. And this was our final MAP data for the year for first through third grade. So some significant gains there. Moving on to math. Our target for third grade in math this year was 59.5%. We did come in at 53%. As we look at our student groups, you'll notice we did have some dips and we did have some gains. I think this is a great goal to just support the evidence of our strategic plan and our intensified focus on our student groups, and working to strengthen our programming in those areas for certain groups of students, all students, but particularly targeting certain groups. As we look at our circle data for our pre-K students, they actually performed above the target in math. So our target for 2021 was 69.5%, and they scored 79.7% for their final cumulative score for the year. We did have, if you look across the bottom at the student groups, the 2021 performance, we did have a dip in one of our groups. But when you get up to the 80 and 90th percent, it's more difficult to maintain. And as I said before, these students come to us from all kinds of backgrounds and experiences. Some of them have had, a lot of schooling experience, and some of them have had none. As we look at our kindergarten students in MAP for math, our goal for 2021 was 53.5%, and our students scored at 56% for their end of year assessment. If we look at the groups of students down below, we are making some progress. There was one group where we were lower, but like I said, considering our year, we feel good about this goal and where our kids ended up. The last area, first through third grade, our goal marker was 53.5% for the 2021 school year. We scored 53%, so we were just right there at our target. As we look at our different groups across the bottom, we were very close with some of the groups that we are really focusing on, and we exceeded. So, our kids may have been slow out of the gate. I've been sharing those progress monitoring reports with y'all through the transmittal. That was like at the beginning of the year, here's where they are. At the middle of the year, we're clawing our way up. Here's where they are. And so I think it's a celebration for the end of the year that this is what their end of year assessments looked like. A lot of progress from those beginning of year progress monitoring markers for sure. And then the last area that we are reporting on is CCMR, our career, college, and military ready. And this progress check meets the part of the state's goal where everyone graduates, right? Military ready, college ready, or career ready. We don't have all of the data on this. We won't have until the final STAR results are out, but this is the preliminary results, so we can report overall areas to you. As you notice, our goal was 72.5%, and we came in at 66%. So you may be going like, that's not too great, right? Well, there were some factors that affected this. This is based on our seniors' performance, and if you remember in the spring of the 2020 school year, we did not. Our seniors didn't have the opportunity to take the ACT or the SAT or to get some of those certifications that would have surely increased that percentage significantly. So we had to go by where they were and the data we had when we shut down for the pandemic. So we fully expect this to be, to meet or exceed next year our target, but that impacted the scores you see right here on this group of seniors in particular. So with that, I would entertain any questions you might have.
I just have a question on the pre-K data.
Sure.
On the reading, you had mentioned that some of the students were virtual. Do you know what percentage of the
Yes.
students in pre-K? I would think that would be a very difficult to have.
It kind of
pre-K.
mirrored the district. It was around, actually checked with our department on that, and it was around 62% of the students
Were
were on site
Were on
and
site.
40 or 38% virtual.
okay. Wow.
And kudos to those parents for bringing those children up
Right.
to be assessed.
Absolutely. Okay. That I was just curious. That just
Yeah.
seemed like a
And we know young learners, we feel like they learn best with hands-on, and
Right.
And so that could have had an impact on that as well.
okay. Thank you.
Just on the CCMR, that 66% for 2021, is that the class of 20 or 21?
So we didn't have any assessments or data
Right, for 20.
for 20.
Oh, so the same, but.
So that's 20, yeah.
Oh, okay. So it is for, okay.
Yeah.
Understood.
So what you're missing there is actually the college-ready component so any students that were maybe signed up to ACT, SAT, or anything of that in the spring of 2020 that did not test, that is really why you see that adjustment in that score. I would anticipate if all things remain normal and we move forward and back to more of a traditional setting, then I would very much expect you to see that rebound significantly in 22. So really, we weren't that far off the mark, and we're missing probably a significant portion that would have been calculated in.
Right. And we know that our AP tests were affected by the pandemic as well. And so that certainly affected this number, as well as we have students who take their certifications from our CTE courses as late as June. And so those opportunities were missing for those students, and had an impact on our overall score.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Trammell. It takes us to D3, consideration and discussion related to the 2021-22 budget and compensation plan. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Mr. Nugent. As a group remembers, Ms. Strauss gave us a very detailed look at our 21-22 budget last month with some preliminary. Excuse me, Mr. Horak is distracting me. With some preliminary compensation numbers here tonight, Ms. Strauss is going to lead us through the latest projections. Many of the numbers are fairly consistent. She'll also be sharing with us updated compensation recommendation, which is up for consideration and action at the regular meeting later tonight. So, Ms. Strauss? You look different, Ms. Strauss. Oh, wait.
Technical difficulties, so.
The real problem is I'm the one trying to fix it. Where's the folder at? Oh, yeah, right there.
I think last time we had a hard time with this.
Okay.
I apologize, it's not really his fault, it's my fault, so I'll open my emails, I sent it to myself.
Okay, let's do that. Okay, there you go. Get in there that way.
Okay, sorry about that. So I'm going to talk to you tonight about the 21-22 budget and compensation plan. The compensation plan will actually be presented again at the regular board meeting for adoption. But as usual, I'm going to talk about the current year, 2021, first, because that's our what I call our base data, particularly for expenses. Then we'll talk about the compensation and benefits, our preliminary information for next year, and debt service. So looking at our general revenue for this year, budgeted about $123 million totally. That was back last August. So now that we are getting to the end, we had a couple of things that occurred, or several things that I've talked about before. One is you'll see this prior adjustments for state revenue of almost $1 million. That's one-time revenue, so it's really helped us out this year. A lot of that is due to some property value adjustments. And of course, we once they lower our property values in prior years, we get some additional state monies. So that's one time. We had some reclassifications that are required, and we never know the exact amount for property tax refunds. So those will be reclassified, and you'll see them on expenses later. So that increased. But we also, our state revenue looks higher, a number of things, but when the legislature changed with House Bill 3 to have current year property values in the formulas, they don't know all of those until January. So the state funding formula changes a little bit for that. But for College Station, because our enrollment was down with COVID, and our property values were a little better than what we predicted in the 1st of August of last year, our state revenue went up, but you can see we now have recapture. So the net there, which is why I like to show it, is really, it's not that far off from where we originally did. So net of recapture, about $500,000 better than what we originally budgeted. But remember, we're taking into account about $1 million of one-time revenue.
So Amy, across the bottom, estimate we adopted a projected revenue of $123 $1,083,000 last August, correct? And now we're projecting an end-of-year revenue projection of 123 million and the 600,000 plus.
Yes,
correct?
that's a net of recapture,
To
correct.
the good of 581 on the revenue side.
Right, net
Okay.
of recapture, correct. So then looking at our expenditure estimates, appropriations, we estimated at 125.7. Amended budget is the same. We've redistributed some things with them, but we've held it there. And our end of year, we think is going to be at 127.6. That's operating. But remember, I just talked to you about that recapture. So the majority of what we're short is this number right here, which you'll see in an amended budget later tonight. I'm sorry, that amended budget's not going to reflect that yet. We'll wait till August when we get that. So the majority of this shortfall is the recapture that I just talked to you about, that we did not budget for initially. And then we'll have 840,000 or approximately thereof of other uses. Some of that, 450,000 or so, is the property tax refunds that we have to reclassify. And then the expenditures related to the winter storm and the hail damage. Those are considered other uses as extraordinary items. They're things that hopefully we don't experience very often. We will have insurance proceeds, but because of our deductibles and where we are in the process, we don't feel like those proceeds are going to come in until next fiscal year. So those are some one-time expenditures that we will see as extraordinary items. So now getting into compensation. As you know, compensation is 80+%, almost 85% between compensation and benefits of our budget. So a very important piece. And staffing is one of our most precious resources. But some of our priorities, which I've talked about before, is increasing that beginning teacher salary to stay competitive with our market so that we can recruit and retain. Focus on our lower pay groups compared to market to try to keep those competitive as well. We review our compensation pay groups, the minimum, midpoint, and maximums. And we're looking for a salary or a rate increase for all eligible employees. Those were the priorities that we set within compensation. So this top shows for 2021, where we were with our market or our peer groups for teacher salaries. So at beginning year for the 2021, we're at 45.5 for a brand new teacher. Our peer group, our peer median was 49.5. So we were in what they call a 92% percentile of that. We were 4,000 below the median. And then at 5 years, we were 91%, 10, 91, and 93 for 15 and 97. So what the colors mean there are green means we improved our position from 1920 to 2021. Yellow is we remain neutral. We didn't make a change. And in 15, we declined, I believe, by 1 percentage point. So looking at our proposed salary schedule that we're going to present tonight, if we bring our beginning teacher pay to $47,000, compared to that peer median, and that peer median is current year because we don't have all of their data, that would put us in the 95 percentile group. Now realize that most of these districts are also going to make changes. So to kind of put it in perspective, last year when I did this was 93%. And so we ended up at 92. So all expectations are this will not stay at 95, but feel like we will better our position from this 92 by making that kind of increase. The 5-year would go to the 93 percentile group as opposed to the 91 right now. The 10-year 93, 15-year 94, and the 20-year would remain the same at the 97%. So this is how we kind of gauge our teacher salary schedule for human resources and that when they're out recruiting and trying to get new teachers into the district. So in summary, the compensation plan as a whole we would be asking to increase our beginning teacher salary from $45,500 to $47,000, and ensuring that each eligible teacher receives at least $1,000 more from their base pay in this 1920 year. Some of those at the earlier steps might receive more, but we're going to make sure that every returning eligible teacher receives $1,000. We've modified or looked at modifying our stipend schedule, very minor modifications here, mainly for market and equity adjustments. A 1.5% pay grade increase based on the midpoint for all of our other pay groups. That would be administrative, professional, clerical, paras, and auxiliaries. Increasing the employer contribution for most of our health insurance plans that we have, that we offer to our employees, and we'll look at that a little closer in just a second. And we're going to ask to implement what we call a pilot attendance incentive plan for some select employment groups, that being custodial services, food services, and transportation for our bus drivers and our monitors. And the last thing is just some additional language that's required for the teacher incentive allotment. As you know, we have applied for that and we're in the process, but should any teachers come in that came from a district already having that, we need to have this language in here. But the total cost or estimated cost to the general fund for this plan is just shy of $2.2 million. $2,191,000 is what we're estimating with benefits and all.
Amy, from last month, the changes were when we reviewed the compensation in the budget last month, we had our beginning teacher, our 0 year at 46.5, correct? And so we adjusted that up a little more aggressively. And we had on item 3, we calculated 1% pay increase from midpoint for those groups as opposed to 1.5, correct?
That's correct. Those are the two changes from last
Those are the two adjustments from last month. And I think the total cost last month ran around 1.9 or shy of 2
Yeah, it was
million.
about 200,000 less.
All right.
Yes, those are the two changes from the last presentation. So this is what the salary schedule would look like based on our proposal. Starts at 47.5. We run ours all the way to 26 years of experience. Of course, anyone beyond that, off of that salary schedule, would receive the $1,000 as we discussed before. This is a 1.85% general pay increase based on the midpoint teacher pay on average. And it's based on a 10-month employment. You know, we do have some teachers that are on a longer contract, but this is based on 10 months. Any longer contracts would be adjusted accordingly. We shared this information with you last month, but TRS published their rates for TRS Active Care. You can see the percent increases range from, you got a few that went down, and that's our HMO Scott and White plan. But the rest of them, although they tout about a 6%, you can see many of them are over 8%. These negatives right here are kind of offsetting that. But we really did look hard at this. And with these types of increases, if we had to continue with what we call an employee-only plan at no cost, it would have been almost $700,000 to the district. So we are looking at some changes there. I will note also that this year, Senate Bill 1444 provides school districts an option for getting out of TRS Active Care. We will be researching that this fall because there are some deadlines if we want to do that. But we will be researching those options to see if it might be beneficial to the district and our employees to do that. So in looking at what the premiums would look like for College Station ISD, these are all of the various plans that we offer and the options for family, spouse, or children coverage. And this last column would show you on a monthly basis that change for the employee. And you can see these ones right here are a slight decline. But sharing some of this cost, that 600, almost 700,000, the estimated cost to the district is about 300,000 with these modifications. We basically split the difference.
Amy, can you go? I'm sorry. So just observation. The district contribution, that is something that why premiums are still just for employees are still high, but our contribution from a district standpoint are very strong.
Yes.
Would you agree with that? Okay. And I think this is something we undersell and something we need to work on through our recruiting process and those types of things, is that many times something folks don't think about is what that total compensation looks like when you take in consideration the district's contribution to these premiums, because we contribute more. We have a tiered system that's very effective that was put in place a number of years ago, and we contribute more to these premiums than I would say a vast majority of school districts.
Yes.
Okay.
Have we, I understand the breaking it down, salary, health insurance premiums, so forth. But when looking at the marketability of the district to teachers, have we combined those two? So, we know we're not in the 93rd percentile for first-year teachers. We might be in the 95th when you add in the health insurance premium benefits.
We have not. What you saw from Ms. Strauss is strictly it does not take into account contributions of premiums. Okay. Because quite honestly, Mr. Bent, especially when you're recruiting beginning teachers,
Less of a priority.
Exactly. It's more about, it's not something that is immediately on their mind. And become more aware of it as you become a little more seasoned in years as far as what those contributions are. I do think that's something we need to start attempting to highlight to sell ourselves some. And as mentioned, Amy showed earlier, and the adjustments in compensation that we'll be asking the board to consider approving later this evening is we have to stay proactive. We have made up a little bit of ground the last few years, and if we don't stay proactive, we'll because other districts are going to make the same adjustments. While we don't have that data yet, we have to stay proactive to stay with the market. Because that does influence recruiting significantly. But at the beginner level, we do not, that is not as much as an influence in bringing in new teachers, so to speak, or new employees.
Okay. A little bit about the attendance incentive plan for auxiliary services that I mentioned. As a reminder, it would be targeted to bus drivers and monitors, custodians, and cafeteria workers. These employee groups, if we have a substitute pool for them, it's very small. And when they're absent, it puts a tremendous strain on those departments. Transportation must redistribute work duties because the buses still have to run. So mechanics end up on the bus and office staff as well. It creates overtime on the other ones because facilities still need to be cleaned and the children still have meals that are going to be served. So in looking at that and a way to kind of promote good attendance and reward that, looking at a pilot attendance incentive plan, because like I mentioned, these groups are very crucial to the operations of the district. So in such a plan, it would look at a payout of twice a year for 10-month or 12-month employees. The 12-month employees are custodians. Of $250 a semester or twice a year. The employees must be active and hired by a specific date as listed in the plan. And what's good about this is if they're hired late, maybe they're hired in October and November, they may not be eligible for it in the first semester, but they could be eligible for it in the second semester. The other thing is if they do have an illness, certainly if they're ill, we want them to stay home. We don't want to spread it, but it would not eliminate them from this in the second semester. So it continues to promote them to be here in that time period. Any disciplinary actions or unexcused absences would disqualify them for that particular period. And then there's some absences that would be considered exceptions. That would be vacation for our 12-month staff and, of course, jury duty or something like that. So those are kind of the summary of the parameters we would put. In looking at the cost of the plan, I ran some estimates. If this plan had been implemented in 2021, the cost to the general fund of the payouts would have been around $35,200. Now, of course, we're not finished with this year for 12 months, so those are estimated. But you also have to realize we could have been offset by some lower overtime costs as well. And then food service would have been a little over $21,000. Food service is a separate fund, and they pay their own expenses. They're expected to at least have expenditures and revenue balance, so they would fund their own program. Now, for next year, we would hope these numbers go up because, of course, the goal is to improve attendance. But again, that was offset by some of the overtime reduction. We would also review the results of this plan at the end of the semester as well as at the end of the year. If it did not accomplish the goals to what we were expecting, then we could either bring back modifications to the plan or eliminate it. Any questions? That's a new piece for this year. Okay, so moving on to 21-22. This is data you've seen before. So looking at a little over 3% enrollment increase or average daily attendance would put us at 13,160. We base that on where we ended this last year with an average daily attendance of 12,777. But remember, we were held harmless to a calculation made by TEA, so that was 13,275. And in property value growth, we feel like we're going to end at or about 3%. So that would result, if it stays at 3% at this point, of a M&O tax rate of 96.19 cents, and we're currently at 0.966. So that would be a very slight decline in the M&O tax rate, a little less than a half a penny, if this holds true. And recall that the compression is a state requirement as part of House Bill 3, the legislative session 2 years ago. So that would be the result. So what did that enrollment growth and property value growth mean to College Station ISD? We feel like the total revenue based on that will be at around $122.7 million. That includes our other revenues of federal and interest and that sort of thing. And our appropriations, $128.6 million. And you can see really almost all of the increases here have been in the way of personnel, salary, and benefits, and then some other areas of inflation. So when you balance the revenues and expenses, it's about $5.9 million. So we're looking at using Sr2 funds for eligible expenses to help support that at this point, to bring that down to $2.9 million. So that's a little concerning. So you have to look at fund balance to see how the district fares in weathering this type of storm. So going all the way back to August of 2015, the district's total fund balance was $30.6 million. If we go to August 2021 with the estimated loss that we projected earlier in the presentation, that would be a $33.5 million. So we've still improved our total fund balance even with that loss of almost $3 million over that period of time. The other thing that we look at is what we call our annual financial rating or first rating, and they measure your fund balance to see if it's adequate. They look at either do you have 75 days, or if you don't, is your change in fund balance less than 25%? And that's an unassigned fund balance, things that aren't committed for a particular purpose. So with that, we would be slightly below the 75 days, but we would fall well within that 25%. But in looking at, we will study that over the next several weeks and maybe bringing a recommendation to transfer some of this committed that has been there since 2011, I believe, and we changed a little bit of it last year, and moving that to uncommitted. And that would be a board action in August, should we bring that forward.
So Amy, just walking across the bottom, so August of 2015, the fund balance was 30.6 million, correct?
Yes.
And so August of 2016, 32.9, so that's a plus of 2.3, right? And then we go to August 17, so we added the fund balance. August 2018, we added about another million. In August 19, we increased again about 900,000, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So
if your 2.6 or 2.7 current year holds is what you're projecting, and we end at 33.5, and so you're showing that to us relative to what our fund balance was in 2016. Still better, even though we've had to draw down last year too. Okay.
correct.
And this still allows us to score all the maximum number of points in our financial integrity rating.
Based on our
system,
estimates,
correct?
we would still get rewarded all of our points.
Okay.
So plans for addressing that deficit, because we don't want to continue that. We have a healthy fund balance, but it's there for one-time expenditures and to help the district weather these types of situations and give us time to make good decisions. But looking ahead to 22-23, the state funding formula that we have to calculate by does change in the second year of the biennium. This is because things like the textbook allotment and those types of things come out in the first year. So based on estimates of the same student data, but 2% property value growth, we would gain about 2.6 million. Some other estimates I've run is as high as 3 million. It all depends on, is our property values growing slower or faster than our student population because of recapture? So anywhere from $2.5 to $3 million, depending on where our enrollment and our property values end up. We also, coming off this last year, we are estimating our enrollment based on that the demographer did and our own history, but we will be looking at that this fall. And adjusting. Hopefully it's better than what we think it will be. And so we can adjust and amend the budget accordingly, and increased enrollment would of course bring that deficit down. We have what we call Sr2 funds that will be available to the district. We do not know yet how much that will be. This Sr2 will operate very similar to what we had in 1920, where they provided these funds, relief funds, but they lowered your state revenue. And you had to offset expenses. So we don't have the final number. College Station will have some. They're going to take Sr2, offset it by how much they had to help us to use that hold harmless, and we will have the residual. But it'll probably be September before we know what that is. We will have to account for it. That's one other thing to remember when I shared the 2021 data. I did not account for Sr2 yet because it's only going to decrease revenue and decrease expenditures, so it won't really affect the bottom line. We're going to monitor the fast growth allotment on our future years. If you'll recall, that was something changed in this legislative session that College Station ISD took a big hit on. It was revenue that would have been there under the old funding formula that was not for us. And we'll continue to review and monitor staffing efficiencies. Being 80 to 85% of our budget, that's where we need to look to to ensure that we are being prudent with our funds. So moving on to debt service, you will be asked in August to adopt the general fund, the debt service fund, and the food service fund, which I mentioned is the goal is to have revenue equal expenditures there. We're currently at 26.3 cents on the tax rate for INS. We have scheduled payments of a little over 26 million. We feel like with this 26.3 cents, we could redeem some bonds early, pay them off early, and save the district monies. We do have a little bit of state revenue. So basically, with the debt service payments and taking advantage of paying some things off, that debt service rate can stay at 26.3 cents. So with that, I'll entertain any questions. There is some other information in here, but it's just enrollment data that you've seen before. So
The previous slide with the debt service, that early redemption, that is on the agenda for consideration later
Yes,
this
it
evening,
is.
correct? Okay.
What is the interest savings on the early redemption?
On this one right here, we haven't run it yet.
Okay.
I've shared some with, we redeemed about almost $1 million recently, and I've got the numbers on that one. But we will time this with, once we know what our property tax revenues are and we know exactly how much we can do, and then we'll calculate it.
And along those lines, you're saying 2.9 million we are paying off early. Is that the?
So later tonight, there will be some action that's required where you authorize Mr. Martindale or myself at some point during next fiscal year, and we know what that is, to actually pay it off. This last year, we just did it this last month.
Right.
So we want to make sure we take advantage of the total collections that we have and that sort. So at some point during the year, when we deem it appropriate at the time and everything else, then we will execute that if you approve it tonight.
My actual question on that is where is those funds coming from? Out of what bucket of money
That comes out of the debt service fund.
Out of the debt service.
Right, based on that 26.3 cents and what we would collect on it based on that 3% property values growth. So it all comes from within the debt service fund.
Okay.
So those funds could not be used for other purposes?
No, debt service,
Different pot of
those
money.
tax dollars can only be used to pay for
Retired
principal and
debt.
interest on debt that voters have approved, and nothing else.
Can you go back a slide?
Sure.
That one. I mean, to me, this is the real issue that we need to, I feel like we need to be thinking about, is that $5.9 million deficit. And so certainly appreciate having a slide about how we're going to address that going forward, because the way I see it, yes, our fund balance can handle it for a year, can handle for maybe a couple of years, but how do you make sure that we do not have that same size deficit going forward? And especially when, as you discuss, such a big percentage of what we spend our money on is our people. And so I'm just trying to have a better handle on that, what is to me is quite a large number. So one way I look at it is, you're taking $3 million off of it with the ESSER 3 funds, is that what it is?
Yes, ESSER 3.
ESSER 3. Do we foresee doing the same thing next year? You didn't list ESSER 3 on this list, but couldn't we use ESSER 3 funds next year as well, or?
If we have all the way until September 2024 to use ESSER 3. So certainly, based on what we use those funds this next year, it can carry forward. We'd have to look at the plan because we are submitting a tentative budget next week on that, but it can be amended. We also have to remember the purpose of ESSER 3. We want to make sure we comply with addressing the learning loss, which is a huge need in the district as well. So we want to make sure with ESSER 3 funds that we accomplish what we need to with regard to the learning loss and supporting our students and families. And then absolutely, we could use some of those funds or ESSER 2 when we get the final dollar amounts to give us another year of planning and get to that next legislative session to see what happens.
And even the 2.6 million you mentioned, can you explain that one again? Make sure I understand.
Sure. So the state funding formula, the best way is there's a calculation in there that in year one is set at $200. And then in year two, it doubles to $400. And the reason is they take that textbook allotment and they fund it. They fund the districts all up front for 2 years so that you have those funds to spend. So they don't have to cover that in the second biennium. So second year of the biennium historically has always been higher, and we already have the formula, so we do know that it will be.
The available school funds, the first year of the biennium, they withhold, you see different times we have purchases and we're paying for it through instructional materials allotment. That is that withholding out of the available school fund the first year of the biennium. They don't withhold that, and that per capita per student that she mentioned, 200 versus 400, goes up the second year of the biennium. So your available fund will go up significantly the second year of the biennium. So that's why she's showing this, to show in the available school fund alone, you're going to account for a large portion of that 3 million. And that's if she's leaving the same student data. Now that's per capita, that's per student. So if there's more students, that 2.6 is going to go up even more. Does that make sense?
It does, and I thought that's what it was, but I think then what I foresee is look out another year.
Correct.
And then we have another year that's lower. So
That's a different legislative year,
Yeah.
Kimberly. In all honesty, that's where after you get outside the biennium, who knows? And the way that, and you're correct, wow, that's a pretty healthy deficit for next year that we're looking at. I think that's just what we have because we need to do something with compensation as well. We have the ESSER funds available to help offset that. We're coming out of the COVID year. But your concern as much as is the same as mine. Mine's more, quite frankly, 22, 23, and how are we managing that? And that's the point of this slide that Amy's showing you to the point being is, yeah, it's okay, we can manage this next year because we have a healthy fund balance, but we don't necessarily need to get into the practice of always relying on that because it will start chipping away at it. So with this, we're kind of looking forward to the following year to make sure that we can keep things manageable. With 85% of our budget and payroll, the way you would manage that through the course of time is we have to be very, very diligent about how we add staff and those types of things and how we're adding to that payroll number. Is that through additional compensation, which I think we have to consider every year to stay competitive and to take care of our folks for the work they're doing for us. I think where we really have to go through things with a fine-tooth comb is adding positions. And that has to be systematic and reflect whether we're showing us an increased enrollment or not for the sake of simply adding positions. Because that's going to be the key piece to managing our cost over the next several years. If there's change in that payroll cost, it needs to be reflective of, it should reflect what our enrollment's doing as well. So that all started with explaining available school funds. So I apologize, Ms. Johnson.
It's okay, you did very well.
No, I appreciate it because I do agree. I want to compensate the people who are here working hard, obviously, and stay competitive. But I also don't want to see $6 million deficit budgets. For very
Well, and
Very
we
long.
do have, there will be ESSER funds available to us through 2024. So that's even through another legislative session. And ESSER funds are going to come available, not to the same degree of ESSER 3. It won't be as much, but that's $12.5 million in ESSER 3. So there will be funds there to continue to support us with some of those things, whether it's summer school, however we're addressing learning loss. Those costs can be coded to ESSER easily for a number of upcoming years. And so that can absolutely help manage things.
I have two questions. In regard to new staffing, have we seen with this potential budget any savings due to the new curriculum management program yet?
We have seen some. We've been able to redistribute and balance with that. I think in previous workshop, I shared some things that we've been able to do, add some positions for CTE, which also generates additional funding. Not by adding teachers, but we were able to realign them. So we have seen some efficiencies just based on when we started that review and the process. And can't keep blaming the storm, but we lost a couple of weeks there with that. So we do anticipate being able to continue working with that software and analyzing our positions this coming year as well, and getting into it in this fall. So as we start seeing changes in the second semester to work on that. So yes, we have seen benefits, and that's going to be one of the tools that we use when I say continue staffing efficiency reviews. That is going to be a big piece of it.
Okay. And then could you go back to the slide with the fund balance?
So
So, and I'm sure if I was better at math, I could kind of guesstimate this in my head, but where is the point with the fund balance? And I know we've got some plans in place to try to limit the deficit and so forth, but what's the number where we as a board from an oversight position need to be like, whoa, we've got a major problem like with our first rating and so forth. What's kind of that, I know it'll go up and down, but what's that number?
And I wish I could tell you that number, but I don't have it. I think the first rating is a good indicator, but we should always be ahead of that and know, and that's why we are right now, to say, okay, based on this, how it's going to affect our rating. So one of the things is to be ahead and looking at that along with those forecasts. So we can look at that, but we're well within. If we look at the total, if we unassigned everything, there's a few things that we can't. We are there, but we do need to continue to monitor and work toward a more balanced budget with some.
I will
good
tell you, Mr.
decisions.
Mayor, where my threshold is, and then you can do with it what you so choose. It's 75 days of operating expenses within your fund balance, and that's unassigned. Okay, we can make adjustments with the committed values and everything else, and she kind of alluded to that below. To me, there are components of the first or the financial rating the state uses that I don't particularly care for, that I'm not real sure are true indicators. This one on the number of operational days within the fund balance, to me, that's the threshold where I begin to get where I would have reservation. Okay, now that's with everything. The way Amy has it is unassigned. I look at the total number, I look at our total budget, develop a per day expenditure, and then calculate that out relative to the fund balance that we have total. And so what I would be watching is for how that translates into days of operating expense. So if you use the 33.5, if we took our total adopted budget, divided it by, the calendar days and assigned a value to that and see what $33.5 million would do, it's going to be over 75 days. I can assure you, is it, Amy?
Oh, yeah,
it's probably
absolutely.
90 or,
Yeah.
and
I don't have
so.
the calculation.
So that is the threshold that me as superintendent and former CFO would keep my eye on. Because we start getting to that place, then that is a threshold that I'm not sure I'm willing to to entertain.
Okay.
And you know, again, the former CFO, so I'm not excited about these numbers as well. But this I do know is, and I've said it several times, you've heard me tonight, we have to address compensation. We have to stay competitive, and we need to compensate our people for the job that they did for us this past year. We have fund balance. We've been diligent about putting it back for a rainy day. Here, well, no pun intended, it was raining.
It's raining.
And so this is here we are. We do have the federal ESSER funds that we can utilize to help us as well. I suspect, and I don't know every other district's budget at this point in time, but I suspect we're not alone in this. I can tell you, I saw a district in the greater Houston area adopted 10% operating deficit budget.
10% what?
Their deficit was 10% of their operating budget. That's correct. You know what I'm speaking of.
Yes.
So I don't think we're alone in this particular scenario. And if anyone's positioned to weather it, we are.
You know, I will add a disadvantage, and this is to all districts. Legislative session ends around June 1st, if we're lucky without a special session. School districts are all either a June 30 or August 31. Thankfully, we are August 31. But that still does not give us enough time when you consider students are back and we're hiring teachers to adjust. So it's not unusual to utilize that first year of the biennium to make those adjustments that we need to make because of the state funding things that changed. There is just not enough time without negatively impacting students to adjust to things. And then coming off the year that we did makes it even more difficult estimating enrollment and that sort of thing. So it's not unusual to utilize this first year of the biennium to kind of reset, regroup, and analyze things for good decisions. Any other questions? Okay.
All right, you going to stay right there?
I'm going to stay right here.
Let's go to D4. Consideration and discussion related to ESSER 3 grant application, including a one-time retention stipend for returning CSISD employees in the 2021-22 school year. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Mr. Nugent and board members. At our June workshop, Ms. Strauss did review information associated with our ESSER funds, as which she'll do again here momentarily. And we did mention that administration would be looking at recommending a one-time retention payment for returning employees utilizing some of these ESSER funds. And so Ms. Strauss is going to lead us through some information. Again, some of it similar to last month regarding ESSER funds, but also speak specifically to the one-time retention stipend that we'll be recommending at the regular meeting.
Thank you,
Strauss?
Mr. Martindale. Some of this is repeat information, but I think it's worth presenting again, but I won't spend a lot of time on it, try to focus on any new details. But as a reminder, we've had 3 rounds of this federal assistance, what we call ESSER 1, 2, and 3. ESSER 1 really provided no net benefit, although fortunately we did carry some of that forward. $1.4 million total was allocated to College Station. The ESSER 2 is about $5.8 million, but we're still waiting to find out what net benefit we will have from that. This is the one that they will offset what the state utilized to keep us at hold harmless last year for enrollment. And then we have ESSER 3, which is mainly what we're going to talk about today, $12.8 million total. And we have until September 30, 2024 to spend those funds. So this is the timeline that I shared with you last time. So we are working toward that grant application deadline of July 27th, which is next week. And just to quickly overview this requirements of ESSER 3 is we must spend at least 20% on the addressing the learning loss that occurred because of COVID and ensuring interventions as we respond to the students' academic, social, and emotional needs. We had to engage in meaningful consultation and engage our stakeholders, getting input from them with regard to how to utilize these funds. And then once we get done and we get our notice of grant awards, we have to continue to monitor how we're using these funds and how effective they are with what we're trying to do with them. So we'll get to that point. Some example of allowable uses, and I put ESSER 2 and 3 up here because what they came back and said, anything that's allowable in ESSER 3, we can use in ESSER 2. And so we will be getting some funds. So I think it's important to recognize that these things will also be eligible with the 2 funds. But of course, it's really anything that's allowed under our federal program funding that we have. We can, anything that's necessary to maintain our operations and our continuity of services to our students and families. That learning loss, addressing that is one of the requirements with that in the mental health. Facility upgrades and protecting against the virus transmissions or the sanitation of our buildings and PPE. Professional development, staff retention, technology, and like I said, you can use it as long as it's an allowable use, transfer general fund expenditures if needed. So I mentioned that required stakeholder input. So we did that by survey. We had 590 responses. So you can see we did get from a variety of community members, parents, and teachers as required. So I think we had some pretty good input. It was open for about 2 weeks, and we did publicize that. So that's the groups that responded. And then looking at the results of that survey, we asked participants to rank 1 to 4 based on need, with 1 being what they consider the lowest need and 4 being the highest. So the yellow bar are the 4s. So that tells you how important these stakeholders felt that these things were. So you can see the highest on the 4 is retention of staff. So the people taking this survey recognized that to retain staff that have been through this, how valuable that is. I think the second one's technology devices, and then of course addressing learning loss. But all of these eligible expenses, you can see that our stakeholders felt overall were important. I look at anything in a 3 or a 4 when you look at that ranking that they considered we should be spending funds on. So in looking at that, we've kind of made some commitments in planning already. So we just finished up summer school. So we are going to use ESSER 3 funds with that, and you'll get a report later on how that spending-wise went. Looking at a reading cohort leader, academy stipends, adding some counselors, trainers, and a couple of special ed positions. So that's what I call committed things as we went through the budget process that we felt were important to proceed. And then we had what we call a stakeholder committee. They were district staff that participated in planning the budget. We made sure that all campus levels, we had elementary, principal, intermediate, middle, and high, all on that, as well as some representations from the C&I department to ensure those special populations were there. But addressing learning loss was, of course, their number 1 priority as well. But professional development, supporting the general fund with the pandemic costs, technology devices, staff retention, post-secondary placement support, and protection of our fund balance with the general fund is how these stakeholders, when we started going through ideas of how to spend it, those were the recommendations from that group. So I want to spend a little bit more time on that retention of staff. As you can see from the survey we did, it was very important. And as Mr. Martindale says, staff is one of the most precious things that we have as we address learning. But we have realized that it took all CSISD staff to get through this last year. And we had to change operations on a regular basis, how we feed kids, how we clean buildings, and how we educate them. So retaining staff this next year that have had that experience is very valuable to the district. And in studying these ESSER funds, retention stipends are an allowable expense as long as they were employed during last school year. So we've looked at the options for that. So the retention stipend that we'll be recommending tonight would be a one-time payment at the end of August this year. Employees must have worked in the 2021 school year and be eligible for what we call district paid benefits. We would prorate that based on the employee's date of hire. So if they came really late in the year, they may not get the full amount, but we'll prorate that. And they must have returned to work for the 21-22 school year and be actively working on the date of payment. Those are kind of a summary of the eligibility criteria that we put together. And then looking at the dollar amounts, $1,500 for teachers and other professional employees, and $1,000 for administrators, paras, and auxiliary staff are the dollar amounts that we looked at.
Amy, where you say other professional employees, that's librarians, nurses, some clarity on that.
It should be counselors, basically those that are on a teacher type contract. So counselors, diagnosticians, speech therapists, that type of group that are considered what we call administrative professionals. So those are the dollar amounts we're recommending. Estimated cost is about $2.3 million. And then looking at the estimated budget, the amount for the whole $12.8 million, I thought when we hit send next week, we'll be applying for the full $12.8, but they still don't have that on our application site. You know, they split that into two amounts. It's a little over $8 million at first, and then we can apply for the other $4 once they release them. So we're not certain if we're going to do the 12.8 or the 8, but we do have access to the full amounts. But in looking at those broad categories, the things with the asterisk are what would qualify towards that 20% of addressing learning loss or the emotional needs of our students. So you can see we will be well beyond that 20% requirement. So $2.8 million is what I call direct expenses with direct interventions. Those are things, summer school, tutoring, small group intervention, that sort. Professional development, which would be campus and district level, include things for both. Some technology devices. And of course, that staff retention and the general fund support are the other two large items there. So that would total about the $12.8 million. As we get our application ready. So our next steps, business office is working on the application right now. Deadline is next week on the 27th. So then they'll be working to set up the budget codes. Then early September is our deadline for our SR2 grant application. So we'll start to work on that, but not knowing the dollar amount that we have really available, it's going to be difficult. We expect what we call the notice of grant award on SR3 probably in about mid-August, at which point all of the website postings that are required will go up to keep the public informed, and we will be transparent, and we'll start that 6-month monitoring our progress in the review, as I mentioned before. So that's where we're at in the process. Any questions?
Is there
Question? Oh, go ahead, Amanda. Sorry.
Is there any concern about, us not getting? Is the application just basically tell us how you would spend it and follow these parameters, or?
No, the application is very complicated, but the dollar amounts are assured. They're out there. We can see the grant application, and the dollar amount is sitting there for College Station ISD.
Okay.
So the two different amounts had to do with some state requirements. We've gotten notified that the state has met those, and it's released. So we got the email that said it was, but we go to the website, and our grant application still has that percentage that all districts were cut for the first application. So these funds are secure.
Great. Thank you.
I asked the same
He
question.
did. He asked the same thing of me this morning. They are secure.
Yeah, it's good to start with your question. That's good. My question was a quick one on the list of the expenditures. Specifically, could you say a little bit more about the social and emotional support line and what things are happening?
Sure. So we have the special education positions that we talked about that we kind of already committed to out of Sr2 Funds. We have posted 3 additional counselors at our middle school and intermediate level that will kind of be split between there to give them some support. And then looking at some contracted services, because again, you want to be careful when these funds go away to sustain positions. Either they're going to be temporary. So, and we're also, having a hard time finding some of these to support some of these social needs. And so we're looking at potentially contracting some of that out to private sources.
So some of them ongoing expenses and some of that would be an ongoing expenses and some not.
If we choose, through attrition, it doesn't have to be, but I think the counselors are probably something that we need to retain.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? All right, thank you. It's going to take us to D5. Something tells me you may stay up there as well.
Yet.
Consideration and discussion related to the 2021 Bond Planning Committee recommendations. Mr. Martindale?
Thank you, Mr. Nugent. Again, from our June workshop, if the group recalls, Ken Hutchins from VLK and Ms. Strauss reviewed project recommendations from our Bond Planning Committee. That group began meeting late March and completed their meetings in May. So here again with an overview of these recommendations is Ms. Strauss. And of course, as we're all aware, as with the last 2 items, this is on the regular agenda for consideration of action this evening. So, Ms. Strauss.
Thank you. So first, I want to talk about the committee methodology just briefly to make sure everybody understands, and also want to recognize VLK that's here to help us with any questions that you might have, and they helped facilitate us throughout this process. But the purpose of the 2021 Bond Planning Committee was to review College Station ISD's need for a bond referendum to support the district in areas such as facility renovations, deferred maintenance, buses, fine arts, land acquisition, technology, as well as other capital needs, not particularly new campuses. And then their responsibility was to, based on that review and looking at the district's financial information with regard to our debt capacity, to determine if they wanted to make a recommendation to the Board of Trustees to pursue a bond for November 2021, and what projects that might include and the dollar amount. So we appreciate all of the work that they did. They met over 5 meetings, I believe, and did a lot of work in those couple of hours each time. So we appreciate that. So I'm not going to go over everything. You've had this before, but we wanted to give you an opportunity before action at the regular board meeting to discuss these projects one last time to see if you had any questions on them. But you can see, first of all, to make sure you know there's actually would be 4 different referendums based on the recommendation from the committee. Used to, under prior law, this could have all fit under one. But they do now require athletic items, those that involve a stadium that seat more than 1,000 to be on a separate proposition. A natatorium or other facilities are under one. Technology devices or personal devices has to be separate. And then everything else can be general. And so the total being about 83.2 million would be spread out over 4 propositions. So, of course, I'll entertain any questions, but certainly the one of the highlights on this one and the largest dollar amount is A&M Consolidated High School, one of our older campuses that's got a lot of needs there in the way of restroom upgrades, flooring, some CTE expansions, things like that. So that definitely, when you look at the total, is the single largest project. And it would expand several years. Because we got to keep the school open while we do that. So we'll do it in phases. I think the next highest item, if we look at dollar amounts, would be what we call district-wide technology infrastructure. That's all the wiring, the cabling to keep us so that we have connections and internet, anything connected to the building. So all of the systems that we use, even tonight, in the classrooms as well as throughout the district. So those two are two of the larger items. The next one down would be, as far as dollar amount, would be $8.2 million in our CTE facility addition that the committee recommended. Looking at that being done in phases. Phase one would be the land and room for some animals as well as maybe some potential classrooms, and then looking at phase two at a later date. So I'm not going to go through each of these items individually. I think you've seen them before, so I'll entertain questions on any of these.
So technology proposition, that's for personal devices?
That's all personal devices.
Okay, and that's required to have its own referendum,
Right.
correct?
Correct.
Natatorium, that's for renovations and so forth at the districts, at the district natatorium located at CSMS.
Yes.
Correct? And the stadium numbers that you see there are renovations in addition to the field house at A&M Consolidated at Tiger Field, as well as press box renovations and upgrade to the sound system at CSHS Stadium. That would be an upgrade to the sound system.
Yeah, the
And
sound
that's what
system
accounts
is
for the
actually
last.
both high school stadiums. Those are.
But that is the single piece for CSHS.
Yes.
Correct.
Correct.
Just to clarify, because both terms have been kind of tossed around, with the district-wide ag facility, is it solely ag or also CTE?
Ultimately, CTE, it would involve much more than just ag, but looking at having to do it in phases for dollar amounts and program planning and all. Initially, it would house animals, and it could have some other classroom space there as well, but looking at other programs as well that can benefit from that location.
Assuming we move forward with the bond, is it something that we could classify as ag and CTE, or does it have to just be listed as ag?
Well, actually, we're listing it as CTE, not necessarily ag. We talked about it as an ag barn, but agricultural is part of career technology education. And so it's all kind of under one umbrella.
One quick question maybe. On the Natatorium renovations, do you know much on the specifics of that? I mean, I know that Natatorium has had some significant problems for many years. Or any of y'all that were actually on the bond committee, did y'all maybe?
I can kind of read from your description, but I may have to refer. Come on up. So it's called tiling the pool, replastering, locker room finish upgrades, and lighting, some others, but I'll let you describe it.
So essentially, it's about 75% cosmetic and the aesthetics of it, and then about 25% function, trying to get some piping replacements and so forth in there, and the structural, cleaning up some of that structure that because of the humidity in the room, trying to clean up some of that. But a lot of it is the aesthetics of it, and then the function being some lighting and some of the piping as well.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I've been in that building many times. It could certainly use, I mean, I know it needs not only the equipment fixes, but it could certainly use the aesthetic upgrades as well. Mm-hmm. We don't have to mention we have a great swim team that uses it, so. Thanks.
Sure. So then just another quick note is this chart shows all of our campuses, and this bond touches every campus in some form or fashion, whether it be security or technology or fine arts or like A&M Consolidated and those Southwood Valley those schools that are getting major renovations as well. But it was really good to see when we actually looked at all of the projects that every campus across the district will see some benefit from this particular bond when it passes. So any other questions?
No questions,
Okay.
comments? All right, I know it's been
Thank you
discussed.
very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
And I know there's some committee members out here. Thank you all for your work and for your presence here tonight. I guess that is going to lead us to our adjournment. We will adjourn, and we'll be back in a few minutes for another meeting. Thank you.